Good morning, everyone. Here we are on the ranch on a Saturday morning, early April. Yesterday we cut down a whole bunch of trees, bucked them to length, and got maybe half, 3/4 of a cord out of that effort. And so that means today we do chainsaw sharpening. So chainsaw sharpening, as you know, we're all still fairly new. Holly and I are still fairly new to the whole rural lifestyle, so we've been doing chainsaw work for about a year and a half. There's a lot of videos online about how to sharpen chainsaws and conflicting information, so I'm just going to tell you what we find works best for us. I've tried the round file, I've tried a bunch of different methods. I have an Oregon chainsaw grinder here. I find that this is best for us for, sometimes I'll be doing 4 or 6 chains all in a go, all at once, and because I'll just change them and then put them on a hook to be sharpened later, so I don't have to sharpen one chain and then go back out again. I can sharpen 5 or 6 and then just have a few in the field with me. Do I think it's still important to know how to file a chain with a round file? Absolutely, because sometimes you're going to want to do that in the field. You may think you're only going to need one chain or something, and you hit a bunch of dirt and it gets dull and you need to touch it up with the file. So absolutely, it's important to know how to file chains in the field. But I also find that files, no matter how careful you are as a human, you can't be as consistent as a machine, and especially given that most of the world is either left-handed or right-handed, so you tend to do a really good job on one side and then not so great a job on the other side of the cutters. So this machine is consistent both ways, and I find it faster. So let me just show you how we sharpen chains. I don't know if I'm going to have to do a depth gauge adjustment, sometimes called a raker. I think the proper term is depth gauge. So of course, as you know, there's the cutters that actually do the. I'm gonna grab a tool here. Sorry. So there's the cutters that actually do the actual cutting of the wood, and then the depth gauge, or sometimes called a raker, will determine how far into the wood this cutter goes. So if the depth gauge is too high, then the cutter won't be able to grab enough wood every time it goes around. If the depth gauge is too low, then the cutter will grab too much wood, and the chain will, the saw will tend to buck into the wood, or it'll stall out because it's just trying to take too much wood at a time. So it's a very small tolerance that you have to work with on the depth gauges. And so I found a way to do the depth gauges with this Oregon grinder as well. So I'll show you that anyway. I'm going to check them because it's been a couple sharpenings since I've adjusted those, so we'll check those anyway. So here we go. Okay, so here we are with the chain on the grinder. So this grinder, let me just back up a bit here. So this grinder is just a small one made by Oregon. I don't even know if they make this model anymore. It's a few years old. And it's just got an abrasive wheel that turns with this motor, and you simply just pull it down to hit the cutters down there. And then on the top, it's got a depth adjustment gauge, so you'd set that every time you put a new chain in, pretty much. And this is just so you don't cut through into the actual roller portion. It's got a little screw which adjusts how far this little thing goes back and forth. So you can see this little arm here will go forward when I turn this. And what that's supposed to do is you back the chain up to that, and that's and then lower this down. So you can see right now there's a big gap there, so I don't want that, obviously, because it's not going to grind anything. So I'm going to go forward until it's just touching the wheel, and then I can go forward just a tiny little bit more, until the wheel just starts scraping it barely. So you don't want to take off too much material here. Some people that only sharpen with round files will accuse the grinders of taking off too much material. Well, sure, if you don't adjust it right, just like if you do 20 strokes on each tooth with a round file, you're going to take off too much material too. So it's all about the operator. And then of course we want to make sure that we're not going too deep here. So we'll just kind of adjust that as we go. Normally with a lot of chains, they are kind of endless. So you'd have to mark the one you're starting on so that you know what's going on, like when you finish, obviously. But this one is a little bit unique. This is the smaller saw we have, and it just the way it works out lengthwise, it actually has 2 cutters on one side. So I always start there with this particular chain, so I just don't have to bother marking it. Normally cutters alternate, left, right, left, right. But on this one particular spot, on this one particular chain, there's 2 on the far side, and so I know where to stop. So, and then this little lever here just gives some tension on this so it doesn't move while you're cutting. So, there is a few little things you need to do during this process, but it's once you get going, it's pretty quick. So the big thing is just to get it adjusted. As you can see, this is on this angle, tipping the cutting blade back and forth is not adjustable on this one. I think on some of their newer ones it is an adjustable angle, something like 15 degrees fixed on this one, but that's fine. It seems to work well. So what we're trying to do here is you can adjust the rotation as well, but what we're trying to do here is get this tip sharp, so the leading edge of the cutter, and then down into the gullet, they call it. We want a round gullet here, so we want to make sure we get down far enough into the bottom so that the edge of the cutting disc, it's not going to line up now because I've got it on the wrong angle, but the edge of the cutting disc is rounded, and you need to make sure it keeps rounded so that it cuts a nice round gullet in the bottom and then touches the top to make that leading edge sharp. That little prickly edge at the top there should be sharp. So that's what we're after. So we can set this to 30 degrees. The rotation here, there's a little indicator there, and then we'll just double check this so it's barely dragging, and then we can just set the tension here. This is fairly loose right now, so what you can do is actually pull it away from the thing here and then move it back, and it's loose right now, almost like a ratchet, and then let it go forward, and then now it's snug when I turn it over. So okay, let's go. You want to do little tapping motions like this. So that the metal doesn't overheat, and that's Oregon's recommendation. So I'm just going to set the depth adjustment on this so it doesn't go much further. I don't want it going too far down here. So the first one takes a moment as you get it adjusted. There, and you can see it stop going down. So now I simply loosen it off. I skip this one because it's on the wrong angle and go to the next one on the same side. I'm just taking off a tiny little bit of metal each time just to sharpen that edge up. And I kind of keep tapping it until the sparks subside, and then I know you can kind of feel that it's not going any further. Yeah, so that's it. Okay, so we've got the first side done here, and then what we'll simply do is undo the nut on the bottom here, big plastic nut, and then rotate that over to exactly 30 degrees on this side, and then now we can do all the cutters on this side. Now I'm going to adjust the forward adjustment again a little bit here, and also the depth gauge, because it does change a little bit. I've noticed, I mean, we're talking fractions of an inch here, but when you're filing the teeth on the side furthest away from the camera right now, the cutting disc is a little bit closer to the chain than here, so you do need to kind of just do a quick little readjustment to make sure that it's all good. So you can see on this side a bit better how the rounded wheel fits into that gullet that we want to make there. We want to make the kind of a crescent shape under there, and that just helps clean the chips out and keep that edge being a cutting edge. So I'm going to go about there. Do one here and then I'll speed it up. I'll show you the difference if I can here between them. Be careful because that's going to be quite warm, that one I just cut. So hopefully the camera will show it, but so there's a freshly sharpened one. That's one I just did. And then the next one, maybe if I can get them side by side to compare them, but unfortunately I can't. You can see the next one just doesn't have the same crescent shape in there. It's kind of hard to tell. And just not as shiny, and if you feel it, you can feel it just not, it doesn't have a tack sharp edge on it. So we'll just sharpen the rest of that. So that one I've already done. So let's go up 2, push it back against the stop. You don't want, I don't like necessarily pulling it hard against the stop and just holding it, because I find that if you do that, then this comes up a bit sometimes, depending on the chain, depending on the angle you're pulling on, and that changes the angle and depth of your cut. So you just nicely nudge it against there and then use the tension meter like they designed it for, then it seems to work well. Just like that. So there's the sharpening of the chain. I hope that made sense. Now I'm going to check the depth gauges. So depth gauge tools can come in a couple different formats. They can look like this, where you simply lay it over the chain. I'll show you that in a minute. This is I think earlier I said 0.125. It's 0.025 of an inch. So the difference between the top of the cutters and the height of the depth gauge, the top of the depth gauge is 0.025. So that's when you chainsaw wood, that's all you're taking off at a time is about 0.025 of an inch. So it's 0.63 millimeters on here. The other type of depth gauge is this depth gauge template, whatever you want to call it, is on here, and this is I believe it's the same distance. This one's a little bit weirder to use, I find, but it does file the depth gauges on a bit of an angle, which I guess technically you're supposed to have. I don't find it, I've tried both and I've tried the machine. I don't find it makes it that big a difference, frankly, but your mileage may vary, as they say. So let me show you how I do the depth gauges here. Okay, so depth gauges, excuse me. I'll set this to 0. Now what I'm going to do is just flip this guy out of the way because I don't need him. And so normally what you would do is you would lay this gauge over, so it's sitting on the cutter head, the top of the cutter here, and the top of the cutter here. and then it's got a little drop in it that you can see there, depression that should show you the height of that. So if you lay it over the top of the cutters, that should not protrude, and then if it does, you would take a flat file and file it down until it doesn't protrude. You can see I actually did take a bit off there because it's shiny. And so the other way that some people do it with these gauges, I'm just going to turn around here because I'm a lefty, so everything's backwards, of course, for me. So this, I don't find these as precise, and I'm assuming I'm using it right because I've only used it a few times. But so this goes over, this little notch here goes over the cutter in front of the one you're adjusting, and then this sits there over the depth gauge of the next link back, and then you would just file it down like this. So because this is on a bit of an angle downwards, because this is right here is sitting on the chain link, and up here it's sitting on the next cutter, this thing is on a bit of an angle downwards, so you do get a downward, like an angled file on that cutter, which I think technically you're supposed to have. But again, I don't know how much difference it actually makes. I haven't been able to detect it myself, but I'm not an expert. So guys that do this for a living, or people that do this for a living, are probably freaking out at this. What do you mean flat versus angled? It's a massive difference, but I've never been able to detect it. So now if I put this guy over here just as a check, I can't feel that protruding. I can't feel that protruding. So that one's now at the correct depth. I can set this the wheel with using the depth gauge in the back to just contact this. Now, remember what I said before about the cutters on the links on this side closest to the camera are farther away from the wheel. So because the wheel is round, that means that we're only going to get the far edge. So if I do it on this side, it's only going to grind that edge of it. It's not going to grind this edge as much. So the depth gauge will be angled that way, which we don't want. So I'm going to turn the chain around, just remembering where that link is. So there's the link we just filed. You can tell it's shiny. But I will double check it just to make sure, because I don't want to do the whole chain and have the wrong depth set. Yeah, and when you file it like that too, you can tell the difference between when you're filing on the gauge, when you're filing on the piece of the depth gauge. They're both called depth gauges, I guess. When I'm filing on the template versus the actual chain, the file makes a different sound. So I know that one's right. So what we're going to do is I've got, again, this set to 0 degrees down here, and I'm going to adjust the depth limiter on the grinder so that it just contacts that. I don't want to go too far because I can always do it twice, but I can't cut it longer, as they say in woodworking. So be very cautious about this one. So now I'm just going to simply go turn on, and I should see nothing here. Go down till it just sparks a little tiny bit. There we go. Make sure you don't hit the cutter. And this is our double cutter, as I mentioned earlier, where they're both on that far side. So I can do the next one here. So you can see there's that one I hadn't trimmed before, so you can see that one's There's not much adjustment necessary here. Nothing on that one. So yeah, I think I did this 1 or 2 sharpenings ago on this chain, so it's barely taking off. I know there's some spark showing there, but barely taking off anything. There's no tension when I slide the chain underneath it. If you do have a lot of chains or a lot of depth gauges to cut down, this is a very fast and consistent way versus doing it with the little files and stuff. Again, you need to know how to do it in the field with the file. So I'm just going to stop there and check it just to show you. Yeah, so it's just right at the gauge. I can just feel the tip if I angle my file over there, but I can't actually file anything off it, so it's exactly right. And even though I'm filing with a round wheel, the round wheel is coming down directly on top of that, and so it is very flat there. That's not angled at all, that top cut. Now again, when I go to do the other side, when I go to do this link, I'm going to physically turn the chain around on this, so this is the close in one, because if I try to do it out here, I found that again it kind of angles it up because you're running on the outside edge of the cutting disc. So yeah, so that's how we do it. So that's my take on chainsaw chain sharpening. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. I learn something every time I do this or most other things here on the ranch. It's always a learning experience, and I'm glad you could join us for our learning curve. We're certainly no experts at this, and I think we're getting better at certain things, and chainsaw chain sharpening I think is one of them. It works well for us, and I'm sure people have different opinions. Some people only sharpen with a round file, which is what I used to do before I got this grinder. I like the grinder results from the grinder better, more consistent, and plus I can be in a warm shop with coffee and the music going, rather than sitting out in the field, sharpening the chain on the saw. I just swap the chains out in the field. And if I'm going out, I just take the Kubota out and bring a few chains for each of my saws. Holly usually joins me and we work together, which is fun too. And we just swap the chains out once they get dull, which takes 30 seconds to do in the field. And then we bring the dull chains back to the shop here, and I can do it in relative luxury compared to being out in the field. So thanks for joining us. I'm glad you watched, and if you have any comments, this is still a big learning experiment for me and for Holly. And if you have any comments that can help us or help other viewers, it would be appreciated. So thanks again for watching. Have a great day, and we'll see you again soon.